Good morning. I'm Bill Shipp, and today we're interviewing Matha Zoller, who is one of the foremost talk radio hosts in the state and has run for Congress recently and is considered one of the more newsworthy and prominent figures in the very conservative Republican Party that we have now. Welcome, Matha.
Thank you, Bill. I'm Matha Zoller, and today is December 17th, and we're getting 2012, and we're getting together to talk.
Let's turn now to you, Matha, and talk about your background. Where were you born?
I was born in Columbus, Georgia, in 1959, August 23rd, 1959. My dad was a hosiery salesman, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. He worked at a company called No Mend Hosiery, which was a company that's not in business anymore, one of those textile mills that are gone. But he worked for a company called No Mend. The next year, he had got a job with a company called Round the Clock Hosiery, and we moved to Washington, D.C. area. And what was interesting about that is we moved in 1960 and left in 1964 to move to Atlanta, which is where I grew up. But what's funny, people thought he worked for the Kennedy administration because we moved in 1960 and left in 1964. But he was a hosiery salesman, and we lived nearby in Maryland. My first memory, clear memory, was of the Kennedy assassination. I was 4 years old when that happened, and I don't remember exactly that it was the President of the United States. I just remember that my mother was crying, my siblings came home from school, and a couple of days after that I was on my dad's shoulders as we watched a horse-drawn carriage go by, which I now know was the caisson that President Kennedy's body was carried on. But we grew up in that area. I have three older siblings, two sisters and a brother, and my dad was transferred to Atlanta in 1964 with Round the Clock Hosiery, and the weather was so good you could play golf 10 months a year. He said, "Don't transfer me anymore." So whereas my older siblings, basically, the life of a traveling salesman, my dad was transferred to a different city every 2 or 3 or 4 years. I had the blessing of being able to grow up in one place from 5 years old on. So I grew up in DeKalb County, Decatur, went to Columbia Elementary School, and then went to Columbia High School. I was in high school at the time when desegregation happened, and so we did have in desegregation in 1972. We were called Racially Disturbed Columbia High School because we had Hosea Williams came and led some protest movements, and I was part of the student council at that point in time, and so we were trying to keep things cool. I remember what was funny is we had we made little buttons out of construction paper with sayings like "keep your cool" and "be cool." I mean, this was 1972, of course, and as part of my role in the student council, we would give these out to everybody. And I can remember, when the news came to coverage, Channel 2 would come to cover what was going on in our high school. It was a pretty tumultuous time for us. I graduated early from high school and then went to the University of Georgia. And had about 45 hours of credit when I came here, so I was able to CLEP out, which is where you were able to take a test, and if you could pass the course, you didn't have to take it. So I graduated from college in 1979 from the University of Georgia with a journalism degree.
Very good. We both went over here, and you apparently did very well. How did you happen to get into radio, and tell me a little bit about your history of getting into radio and some of the shows you've done and what your plans for the future are.
Yeah, what was interesting enough, I started out at the University of Georgia as a voice major, and the joke I always told was that I was a mezzo, which meant I was never going to get the lead, so I had to find a different major. But really what it was is I was the course load of a music major. If you've never been in the arts at an institution like the University of Georgia, you'd take like 9 classes and get 12 hours of credit, and I just couldn't handle the course load. So I loved journalism, and so I switched over to the Grady School and graduated with what they called back then a radio, TV, film degree, and then they changed the name to it to telecommunications arts, and initially got a job doing production. I never saw myself as a person that was going to be on the talking side of the microphone. I always thought I would be on the production side. and I got a job initially out of college with a company that I had worked for named Riches, which is now Macy's, doing training videos for the employees. I mean, and how far away could you get from news than that? I was teaching, employees how to do things and putting videos together. Well, this was 1980, and we were in a pretty tough economy at that time too, and my job got eliminated. And so in lieu of not being able to find a job in media, I actually took a job in merchandising, and so I worked my way up to being a buyer, and I got to spend other people's money and travel, and it was great. And then in 1990, I married a man with 3 children, and so I became an instant mother of 3 and decided to be a stay-at-home mom, which again was a role that I never thought I was going to play, because I was kind of a woman of the 70s where I thought you could do everything all at the same time. And what I learned the hard way is you can't do everything all at the same time. So while I was staying at home with my children, I started listening to talk radio. And I was becoming, like a lot of people in the South at that point in time, I had been a conservative Southern Democrat throughout my early voting years. And as the Reagan era came along and things came along in the South, I started thinking, wow, I'm not really as liberal as I thought I was on particular issues. I'm really more conservative on issues, and was becoming more Republican and more conservative as that time period came along, as a lot of people in the South were at that point in time. So I was listening to talk radio, and Hillary Clinton had made her comment that I could have stayed home and baked cookies, and I got angry about that, and I called into talk radio as a caller, not as a person that was going to do a show, but I called in and I said, Lord, I'm staying at home with children. It's the hardest thing I've ever done.
Did you call?
I called into WDUN. Morning Talk was the name of the show.
In Gainesville,
Georgia, which was where I was living at that point in time. So after a period of making a few phone calls over a number of months, a call-in type talk radio show, the Jacobs, who owned WDUN, Mr. Jacobs asked me if I wanted to come in and do a couple of days a week on a show called Midday. And so Bill Main was the co-host, and he and I would get together a couple of days a week, and kind of like, as they say, people liked me, and one thing led to another, and I was doing 2 days a week, and then 3 days a week, 4 or 5, and I was doing a little bit every day of the week with Bill Main. And ironically, we were now in the throes of the O.J. Simpson trial, and a very small station called WGGA, which was one of the first stations. It was an AM station, 1240, was part of the Jacobs Media group of stations with WDUN. And they had an OJ update every day from 12 to 1 to say what had happened in the OJ trial. Well, in June of 1996, the trial was over, and they needed something to fill that hour. So they asked me if I wanted to do the Martha Zoller Show 12 to 1 on WGGA. Well, WGGA is a 1,000-watt station, and so it has a fairly small signal, and so it was a great opportunity, because nobody called into this station because there were so few people listening. And so it was an opportunity for me to hone my skills of being able to talk, which I've never had trouble with, but to be able to talk on the radio. And I did this hour-long show, 12 to 1, called the Martha Zoller Show. That was in 1996. Fairly soon after that, I was brought over to the main station, WDUN, where I started doing, it was called Morning Talk with Martha Zoller from 9 until noon. And then over the years, it became the Martha Zoller Show from 9 until noon. And I stayed with WDUN until 2009. And during that period of time, I started doing some television with the Brunel News Forum. In 2000, I joined the Georgia Gang, which is where I met you, and I did the Georgia Gang on television for about 10 years, and then I started doing cable news hits and that kind of thing, and writing columns. So I was becoming sort of a media group where I was doing a little bit of everything.
You're in a stable of very conservative columnists. Who do you regard as the best among the conservative columnists?
Oh, I love Charles Krauthammer. I mean, he's my favorite columnist. I think he always has an interesting way of looking at things, and he doesn't always tote the party line. I mean, he questions things. I think we as conservatives and as people of either side, I mean, I don't care if you're a liberal or you're a conservative, if you're not questioning and being cynical in a way, of what your party or your group's doing, then you're not doing them any favors.
A lot of people in the media outside of talk radio and talk television are very liberal. How is it that you did not go in that direction?
Well, I think that what has happened is that the original media, the mainstream media as people like to call it, I think it is pretty liberal. I mean, all you got to do is look at their voting patterns and look at the way they give money. It's something like 87 to 90% to Democratic causes. But I think what's happened is that talk radio and blogs, Fox News, other folks have become kind of the conservative side of that, the balance that you've got to have there. And I think people want to see different voices. In 2009, I joined Cox Media Group, and I've been doing radio with them, and I'll be going back to that in January. And it'll be interesting because it'll kind of bring me back full circle to where I came, because I'm going to come back on the air at WGAU, which is another 1,000-watt AM station. And then I'll be doing other things after that.
WGAU is
here in Athens.
Right.
Yes.
You're going to broadcast from WGAU?
I'll be broadcasting from Gainesville. That's the wonderful thing about being able to do radio, is they have a studio for me in Gainesville, but I'll be broadcasting on WGAU.
That's right. What do you consider, beyond the shooting we discussed, what do you consider the burning issues of the day?
Oh, certainly what we try to do in talk radio today, and what we've seen since the election of 2012, is people are pretty burnt out. It doesn't matter if you're conservative or you're liberal, but especially conservatives are pretty burnt out, and they don't want to talk about certain things right now. So what we try to do is to bring on, well, let me finish the one point and then I'll get to that. We're trying to bring on issues that are important, and I think it's certainly today everyone's talking about this shooting. It's going to be the fiscal cliff, which is coming out, and people want to talk about that. And then how the party is going to respond to what happened to them in 2012, which was kind of a mixed bag of results. I mean, the president won re-election, but not within as many votes as he got in 2008. But the House lost a few Republican seats, and the Senate, I believe, was the huge loss of this election cycle, because there were 23 Democrats up for election, and we lost 2 seats. And the issues that people don't want to talk about right now, Bill, are social issues. And it's because even if they agree
social
with the
issues,
person—
that covers a wide variety of sins. What are you talking about specifically?
Abortion and gay marriage. People do not want to hear about it. They don't want to talk about it right now among listeners and that kind of thing. And I think it's because they realize that those were issues that were used effectively or ineffectively to be able to further the liberal cause in the last election. And so we've got a lot of soul searching to do in the Republican Party and in the conservative movement.
Were you shocked at the number of votes that Obama got, especially in view of the amount of money that the Republicans spent to defeat him? And their single issue, it seems to me, in looking back at that election campaign, their single issue was defeat Obama.
Well, I don't know if I'm qualified to say what mistakes were made, but what I will say is about $2 billion were spent on this past election, Democrats and Republicans, for the presidential side, which is something we've never seen before. My father used to say that I was going to be the first woman president of the United States, and he brought me up to believe that I could do anything that I wanted to do. I'm pretty sure I can't raise $1 billion, so I don't know what's going to happen with that. But I will tell you that we're in a crossroads in this country where, and you asked me, was I surprised that the president did as well? Yeah, I am. I was surprised that people did turn out to vote for him. He had an incredible turnout machine. He is the first president in a very long time to get less votes in his re-election than he did in his first election. And so he lost a little ground there, but he still won.
Lose.
Yeah, absolutely. But about 170,000 votes in 3 states. If they'd gone the other way, we would have had a different outcome. But I think that Mitt Romney had an opportunity. There are 3 things that worked against him. He had the momentum, no doubt about it, after the first debate. He was picking up every day. He was starting to do better in the polls. He had some energy behind him. The second debate, the president, as you expected, brought his A game and did very well. But I think the 2 things that really hurt Mitt Romney was that in the third debate, he did not go after the Benghazi attack, and he did not go after the president on foreign policy. He was not strong, and that hurt him. Then Hurricane Sandy came along, which took presidential politics out of the news for 2 or 3 days, and you know as well as I do, these things are about momentum. And if you have the momentum, sometimes that'll carry you through, but the momentum got crushed at the end there. And then the president had a much better turnout machine. You know, I volunteered after, you know, and we'll get to my congressional race in a moment, but I volunteered in 2 states that were swing states. I went door to door, I knocked on doors, I did grassroots politics, and the Romney campaign was very difficult to work with in that area, and you'd be surprised about that. And
You
I
were
think that they
campaigning
didn't.
for Romney, is that correct?
I did.
What states were you in?
I was in North Carolina and Virginia.
And how were you treated? How were you received? He took North Carolina, Romney did.
Yeah, I mean, it was fine. It was the first time, actually, I've done phone banking, I've done all kinds of things. I've volunteered for campaigns since 1976. Not while I was a journalist full time, I didn't do it, but before that and then after. But it was interesting because it's such a science to where it's not just knocking on each door. You kind of pick the people that you think are going to go your way, and you look at that. So it was a fairly positive experience, but it was a good experience to add to my my box of experiences that I have doing that kind of thing.
Well, let's talk about another experience you had, which is your congressional race. Were you disappointed you lost that primary? You lost that primary with almost every significant political figure in the district endorsing your opponent.
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough one. I laughed because, of course, while many doors have been open to me, and I have learned the lesson that a graceful loser has opportunities open up. But of course I wanted to win. I wouldn't have done this if I didn't want to win. I believe in what I stood for. I was the only candidate in the race that had a plan. And some people said, Martha, that was your problem.
What did you
had
principally
specifics.
stand for? Tell me.
Well, less spending. That was the number one problem that we had. We went around to every county. There were 20 counties in this district.
Less federal spending.
Less federal spending, because this is a federal race. We went to every county. We asked them what was important to them. We put together what was called the Map for Prosperity. That was a plan of action of protecting conservative values on social issues, abortion and marriage, protecting our economy with creating jobs by lessening regulation and getting taxes lower and getting spending lower. I mean, it was a true conservative platform. But my opponent didn't attack me on, Congressman-elect Doug Collins did not attack me on those issues. What he attacked me on was that over the years I have been more open about social issues, abortion and gay marriage over the years. As a pundit, as somebody that was giving my opinion on things, there were more than 10,000 hours of me on radio, hundreds of hours of me on television, as well as all the columns that I've written. And we knew going into this race, when I announced back in September of 2011 that we expected that he was going to take things out of context and use them against me. That's what he did. Okay, and that's fine, but it did, and we had all the big names behind us, the Tea Party, Sarah Palin, Rick Santorum, Newt Gingrich, Herman Cain, and Shipp and Susan B. Anthony List, Georgia Right to Life. All those folks were supporting me at the end in the runoff, because we tied in the primary.
And how many candidates were in the primary?
3 in the primary. We tied in the primary within 700 votes of each other. We had a Ron Paul type constitutionalist candidate as the third candidate, who would have naturally lined up behind me, and his voters would have lined up behind me, but he took the position of not taking a position for the runoff. He stayed neutral for the runoff. And in the runoff, that's when Nathan Deal came out, that's when Governor Deal came out, that's when the Speaker Ralston got on the road and did those kinds of things. So I feel pretty good, actually, that I had the entire establishment working against me, and I was kind of hard to beat. But there was a super PAC formed to run ads against me, and so they threw everything. I like to say they threw everything, including the kitchen sink, at me, and they won. But I was hard to beat. And so that's, I haven't ruled out running again, but it won't be in 2014. I need to make some income between now and then.
Well, I've been covering politics for 100 years, And I have never found a politician who didn't tell me that they learned much more in losing a race than they did in winning. What do you think you learned?
I think I learned, certainly I became a much better fundraiser, and I really realized how important money was. I never had $50,000 in the bank in the entire campaign. I mean, eventually money would come in, and we raised close to $400,000 by the time it was all said and done. But it was like pulling teeth, Bill, to get money in, because people were afraid to get in support of me with money, because they didn't want, the impression was always there that the governor was supporting my opponent, even though, you know, that wasn't the case until the very end. But it was one of those things where people were afraid to get involved. And I got to tell you, as a woman in politics, you know, and a first time running, women don't have the networks that men do. I ran up against the good old boy network, and look, I've made peace with everybody. I have no enemies as far as any of this is concerned. You can't have enemies in politics. It doesn't do you any good to do that. But I learned that you got to have money to run. I didn't have the money to answer the stuff late that I needed to be able to answer it, but also that you never know who your friends are going to be or your enemies are going to be. You just never know how people are going to be, and you got to have a really thick skin. I mean, I really, honestly, my husband, I'll tell you this, my husband took it a lot harder than I did, and I think that's normal, okay? But I have spoken to Doug Collins, who's going to be the congressman. He's asked my advice on issues. I've been doing some grassroots work for the governor, helping him with the Tea Party, and we haven't gotten into really the Tea Party yet, which I am very involved in, and we'll talk about that too. But I have used my loss to be able to reach out to people and talk about issues around the state. And I'm going to continue doing that, because this wasn't about necessarily me being a congresswoman. And I know that sounds corny and everybody says that, but this was about trying to get a dialogue about issues. The 9th District of Georgia is going to be Republican. I mean, it's 74%.
Let's tell people what the 9th District is.
The 9th District of Georgia is Hall County, which is sort of right above Metro Atlanta, north to the border, over to South Carolina, down to Elbert County, which used to be the granite capital of the world, which is kind of like just a little bit above Augusta, and then back around. And it was 20 counties, okay?
Including part of Appalachia, right?
A little bit, that's right.
Right.
It was 73% Republican. Okay, I like to say it's the mirror image of the John Lewis district, which is the Democratic district in Atlanta that's about 75 or 80% Democrat.
You're saying it's the most conservative
It's the
district?
most conservative district, in one of them in the country, the most conservative district in Georgia. A Republican is going to be elected in that district for at least the next 10 years. So the primary is where people ought to get involved. And you always hear people say, well, I'm not going to get involved in the primary. Well, if you don't get involved in the primary, you're not going to be involved. Now, a Democrat did run this time, a lawyer by the name of Jody Cooley. He got 23% of the vote. So
Where
it's a
was he?
very...
Where was he from?
He was from Gainesville also.
That's interesting. Do you, in view of your experience of not having enough money to go up against the super PACs and the big names against you, do you foresee the time that we'll have campaign spending reform?
I'd like to have campaign spending reform. And I tell you, here's what my view is. While I support the Citizens United decision, which is the decision that allowed corporations to get involved. Well, let me finish my point. I do support it. But we still have like the Wild West out there with super PACs. And here's what I would do. If Martha Zoller had campaign finance reform, I would allow people to give, individuals, to give as much money as they wanted to give, as long as they put their name next to it. When you've got the name of, a group next to it, you don't know where the money came from. As long as there's transparency, I'm fine with money being in politics.
That's very interesting. But you were still with Citizens United. You think it was a good decision?
I think it was a good decision, yes.
You don't think it changed the entire flavor of politics?
It did change the entire flavor of politics. But I think we find, Bill, after these big decisions sometimes, that it takes a few years for it to settle out, for people to really know what the decision means. And I think that it was the Wild West out there, this year, as far as super PACs were concerned. There were almost no rules for super PACs. The whole Citizens United decision was about the Hillary movie that they wanted to release in 2008 and were banned from releasing. See, I think if someone makes a documentary or something like that, as long as they're disclosing where the money comes from, why not be able to release it? More information is better.
Don't you find it somewhat interesting that the 9th District, which has great pockets of poverty in it, goes so big for the Republicans rather than the Democrats and the social programs?
You know, I really don't, and I'll tell you why. If you take a look at any kind of campaign reporting, what you see is the wealthiest zip codes in the country go Democrat, and that's kind of ironic too. The wealthiest zip codes tend to give the most money to Democrats and tend to go Democrat. What I found as I traveled around the district is that these are constitutional, small government people that don't necessarily want a lot of government help on issues. They just want to be able to work. The problem we had in the 9th District, I think, is that we were very construction based, okay? And we're talking about in the Gainesville North. There was huge amount of growth, and Atlanta saw this too. With this downturn in the economy, hit people that were construction based a lot harder. And we just haven't come out of it yet. And I think those are some of the challenges that we have in the 9th District as far as the economy is concerned. We actually do have a higher unemployment rate than the national average in the 9th District. And some of those counties, like Gilmer County, were very carpet based, and they're still recovering from what's going to happen or what happened with the housing collapse. So we have just seen a much slower recovery in the 9th District, although it's coming back.
Did you do any polling when you were running?
We did one poll at the beginning, and I had the best name ID and all of that kind of thing. But I'll be honest with you, Bill, polling costs money, and we were trying to keep the lights on and do the response to things, so we didn't do a lot of polling along the way. I understand that there was a poll done coming out of the primary that did have me ahead. And that's when my opponent, Doug Collins, decided to just go nuclear and just throw everything they could at me, and that's what they did right at the end. But you know what? I'm not hostile about that. I'm not angry about it. Because I learned a lot from the process. I still believe that I have a lot to offer, whether it's going to be on the journalism side or in the political side. I'm going to stay in the fray because this was about ideas. This wasn't just about me being a congresswoman. I know that sounds corny, but I think I was doing it for the right reasons, and I'm going to put myself out there again.
You are aware that media figures historically do not do very well.
I am aware of that.
No matter what their popularity seems
That's
to
true.
be.
It's very true. It's very true.
How does your husband, tell me how he takes this? I mean,
Well,
you're a physician's wife and
Yeah,
have been for some time. And
Yeah, my husband's a primary care physician. He did a lot more of the putting up signs and that kind of stuff instead of going with me to a lot of events. He would come if he needed to be, but he's kind of a shy guy, and so he would come. He did come to some of the debates, which was very difficult for him to sit and listen to some of the attacks that were being thrown at me that he knew not to be true. I will tell you that after I lost, I took about a 48-hour pity party, okay, you know, where I just kind of sat around and felt sorry for myself for about 48 hours. And then Lynn and I just kind of, my husband's name is Lynn, we just kind of looked at each other and we said, you know what, you and I are about all we've got. And we're going to just keep fighting for the right things. So his feelings were hurt. He took it a lot more seriously than I did. And I don't mean I didn't take it seriously, but I put myself out there. Plus the fact, being a radio talk show host and being out in the media, and you know from your career, people have been taking pot shots at us for years. I mean, people have been calling me names that, you know, my mother wouldn't want to hear for a long time. But it's something I put myself out there. And my children, who are all adults now, I mean, they had to read some of the stuff, and that was one of the reasons why I waited until they were grown, because I wanted them to be adults, because I knew people would take pot shots at me. A woman in politics, I mean, they comment on your hair, your weight, your clothes, very rarely on the issues that you talk about. They go out, I jokingly would say on the campaign trail that, you know, there are plenty of really bad pictures of me out there, and my opponent found every single one. And it's true. You know, when you're in the media like this, there's a lot of bad pictures of you out there. So
how do you account for the fact that Georgia never seems to elect a woman in a really high office? Like Congress, it's rare that a woman congressman is elected in Georgia. We've never had a woman governor. But
you know,
yet all the states around us, just about, like Alabama and even Mississippi, have had women in high places elected. Well, what do you think's the difference?
You know, people want to parse up the electorate and, you know, what the black vote, the white vote, the men's vote. I think we have a woman problem, okay? And it goes across all socioeconomic, and it goes across all colors, that kind of thing. We're not, you know, women in the Republican Party do the work, okay? I don't know about the Democratic Party as much as I do the Republican Party, but the women in the Republican Party do the work. And they have a hard time translating that into working for candidates and getting women elected. And I don't know exactly what the answer to that is, other than more women getting out there and running. I think I've laid the groundwork for other women to run. And like I said, I haven't ruled out me running again. But I think that what has to happen is we've got to stand up and call things what they are. In the last 3 presidential elections, and I know we were talking Georgia, but just to give it a little bit of a national view, in the last 3 presidential, or about 4 presidential elections, there's a group of women that make between $50,000 and $90,000 a year. They make up about 13% of the electorate. And in 96, they voted for Clinton. In 2004, they voted for Bush. And the last 2 elections, they voted for Obama. And many of these women are single. And as you know, if they go to a 3rd election, it's going to be hard to ever get them back as far as whether they vote Democrat or Republican. So we've got to reach out, and I think that, you know, we've got to decide, you know, how we're going to deal with these issues that women care about.
Were you disturbed that the Republican Party seemed to be waging war against women?
Oh, I don't buy that they were waging war at all. I think that was a Democrat
very
issue.
strict abortion laws that were proposed.
You know, I don't see it as a war against
voting
women.
Against a right to equal pay for women. How do you view that? And you're right in the middle of it.
I am, but honestly, if you take a look, I believe there is a glass ceiling, okay? But I also believe there are choices that women make. I make less money than my male counterparts, mainly because I took 10 years off to raise my family, and I had to start over again, okay? But I wouldn't trade those 10 years for anything. And many women are in that area. You take a look at lawyers and doctors. Pretty much lawyers and doctors, the female counterparts make more than their male counterparts at this point in time. So there are areas where women are making more money than men, depending on where they are. I don't buy the whole war on women thing. I just think that we have done a lousy job, meaning conservatives, in putting our message out there. I think that we've got to have more women's voices out there doing it. Maybe I'm swimming upstream, you know, on this, but I think there's got to be more women's voices. I got skewered in my campaign for a comment that I made where I said I'm a different kind of pro-life person. My opponent chopped it off there. What I went on to say was the whole quote was, I'm a different kind of pro-life person. You can't just change things with legislation. You've got to change hearts and minds. Because right now today on this college campus where we are in the University of Georgia in Athens, 60% of women who are college age consider themselves to be pro-life. For the first time, we are winning in that demographic as far as pro-life. But they don't believe abortion should be illegal. They are pro-life, and they do not believe in abortion, but they think that the legal process needs to be there and the medical process needs to be there.
And yet the platform of the Republican Party vis-a-vis abortion said abortions are illegal and there shall be no exceptions. Not the health of the mother, not rape.
Now that's Georgia Right to Life's position. Well, they allow life of the mother, but I don't think the Republican platform was no exceptions. I think it was rape and incest. We'll double check that.
How do you feel about that?
I do not. I only support abortion in the case of life of the mother.
That's the only case.
Yeah.
What about the Hispanics? A great number of Hispanics in the 9th District. How'd you do among them, do you know?
You know, they're not voting yet. They're
they're
still
not
a
voting
very...
in the Republican primary.
No, they're not voting. Like in Hall County, which is the largest county in the district, there's still a couple of thousand Hispanic voters, that's all. That's going to change in Georgia, no doubt about that, over the next 20 years. But at this point in time, you're not seeing the Hispanic vote really affect Georgia elections yet.
This is a good time to plug your book. Tell me about your book.
Yeah, I wrote a book in 2005 called Indivisible: Uniting Values for a Divided America, and what it took on were 10 issues that I thought we had more in common with each other than to disagree. And I took on the abortion issue in the book because I think that really when you talk about abortion, most people believe that abortion as a method of birth control is wrong. Doesn't care if you call yourself pro-choice or pro-life.
Do you know
you
anybody
think it's wrong.
that uses abortion as a method of birth control?
Well, what I mean is that it's just not a good time. That they don't have it. They have an abortion not because of a problem or anything like that. They do because it was just a bad time. And look, Bill, I come to this because I have a heart for post-abortion women. I have done volunteer work throughout the years with women who have been in groups that have gone through abortions. And what I found is that even women who went on to do all the things that you're supposed to do, finish your education, get married, have other children, there was a hole in their heart that they never got over because of this abortion that they had. And so we've got a dialogue about this, and I don't mean to sound all touchy-feely about it, but we've got to talk to women about it. We as Republicans and as conservatives need to get out there and talk to it. And I think that what's going to happen is we've got to have more women's faces in leadership. Right now there are fewer conservative women in Congress. There are fewer conservative women across the country. Now we have some stars like Susana Martinez in New Mexico, and we have the Oklahoma governor is a female, and we got Nikki Haley in South Carolina. There are some stars coming up through the governor's ranks, but at the same time, we don't have enough women serving in office and talking about these issues.
Don't you think part of that is the reason that the attitude toward the mainstream of the Republican Party seems to be so harsh, particularly where women are concerned, in equal pay and abortion, health care, and other things?
You know, you and I can agree to disagree on that. I just don't, the whole Equal Pay Act, I didn't support that because I think people ought to get paid what they're worth, and I don't think the government's going to help you make equal pay. I mean, I've always worked salary throughout my whole life. Some days I've made a lot of money, other years I've made not very much money, and I just think that it's something that the government can't control. They should we already have non-discrimination on the books. I think we already have enough laws on the books. Now, I will say the Democrats did a great job as painting it as a war on women, and they won that argument. So that's why, and I'm one of these people, the Democrats won on election night in 2012. Okay, they basically won, even though we still maintained control of the House. The Republicans did. They lost some in the Senate and lost. They won, so we've got to learn the lessons from that.
They retained control of the House because they drew the districts mainly because Democrats got more votes throughout the House elections than the Republicans did, totally. So that would make me think that maybe the whole country is drifting to the left and leaving you folks behind on the right, which brings me to the Tea Party.
Yes.
Do you think the Tea Party weighted down the Republican Party so that they could not do as well as they did?
No, I think the major flaw in the last two elections for Republicans, big presidential elections, is they didn't know how to use the people who were supporting them in the right way. They didn't use talk radio. They didn't use local media people that would support them, and they were afraid of the Tea Party. Mitt Romney wasn't a Tea Party guy. He didn't really even understand the grassroots, okay? And
anybody's
even
got
though
a car
Tea Party
elevator is probably not a Tea Party guy.
Well,
right?
I'm not going to say that, but the point is, I am a fiscal conservative Tea Party person. I stood on a bench in 2009 in front of a group of 200 people in Gainesville, and because we didn't have a permit for a megaphone to talk about the spending issues and the taxation issues. I then went to Athens, where it was a much smaller group, as you can imagine, because it's Athens, and spoke to 30 people. And for the last 4 years, I have been going to every group that I can to speak to Tea Party groups. Now, the Tea Party is not one thing. You can go to 20 Tea Party meetings in Georgia and you're going to find different issues that they're concerned about. I wrote a column last week that ran in Peach Pundit and ran in the Dublin paper down in South Georgia about what the Tea Party needs to do going forward. And what we have to do is get back to the fiscal roots. In the Tea Party right now, some groups are too focused on things that have nothing to do with fiscal issues, the United Nations and things like that, that just aren't going to get us out of there. I think you got to take 3 things you really believe in and you need to focus on them. So I'm a fiscal conservative. I was a fiscal conservative through the Clinton budgets, through the Bush budgets, through the second Bush,
But
through
what
all
does
of
that
that.
mean? Do you think we ought to cut Medicare, cut Social Security, Medicaid?
Well, I think everything's got to be on the table, Bill. When
No, I
you've
didn't
got an
say everything on the
unfunded,
table. I said, do you think we ought to cut those programs?
yeah, well, let me give you a perfect example. Right now, I won't collect Social Security benefits until I'm 67 years old because of the way my birthday falls. Why shouldn't my Medicare benefits start at 67 also? I mean, there are simple things that we could do that would make a difference. So to answer your question, yeah, we've got to change Medicare, not for people that are 55 and older, but for people under 55, we've got to change Medicare. We've got to change Social Security. You know, my husband is a primary care physician. He makes less money every single year because the Medicare system is more interested in the bureaucracy than it is in delivering health care. We've been talking about waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicare since Dukakis ran for president. Okay, and nobody has dealt with the waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicare. So yes, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security has all got to be on the table.
What about defense?
Of course, defense. Defense is already cutting spending. Because defense is spending less year over year in actual dollars. In the last 2 fiscal years, they've spent less year over year, and they've been asked to do even more. So of course, everything's got to be on the table.
What about the tax on the top 2% of the wage earners in this country?
You know what I love? You know what I love is that throughout the whole campaign, it was the top 1%. And then I noticed about a month before the campaign was over, everybody started talking the top 2%. Look, the rates we're paying today, Bill, are the rates that people that are 35 and under have only paid. So to those people, it's going to be a tax increase if we don't come to an agreement. To people like us who are a little bit older, yeah, we've had the ups and downs of rates. But for people that are young people, 35 and under, these are the only rates they've paid since they've been out of college. So these are the rates. So I don't call them tax cuts or tax cuts for the rich or any of that. These are the rates that have been in play for a decade.
The Bush rates for all those people, and then do not maintain them for the top 1 or 2%. Do you think it's fair? Do you think it's fair to have different rates for the rich people than we have for
the rich already pay more. They pay higher rates. You know, some would argue, do you think that's fair? Look, the bottom line is...
Democratic millionaires all the time talk about how they pay less taxes than their secretary.
Well, and you're talking about Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett's secretary makes about $500,000 a year, so she's part of the 1%.
But she still makes much less than he does. That's
because he doesn't make his money off of income, okay? He makes his money off of investments.
Well, you think that ought to be equalized?
I don't think it should. Here's what I think ought to happen. Right now, the top 2% pays about 50% of the taxes, okay? I think that here's in the real world what's going to happen. I think the rates are going to go up on people making $1 million or more, and I'm fine with that because they're going to find a way not to pay it because they have the resources to be able to find a way not to pay it. Well, that brings up something else.
What about stopping those loopholes, stopping overseas investments and that kind of thing the rich have used?
Look, I'm not anti-rich. I hope to be one someday. So as far as the loopholes go, we'll see what happens. But I'm a fair taxer. You and I have talked about that for years. I think we need to throw the whole system out and replace it with the fair tax. But what do I think is going to happen?
Now, the fair tax is a national sales tax.
The national retail sales tax. That's right. And that would, people who spent more would pay more. And I think that it would work. It would be the fairest way to do it. But right now, we do have a graduated income tax rate. And I think that in the real world, what's going to happen is the rates will go back to the Clinton rates on the top level. But this idea that the rich aren't paying their fair share is, you just got to look at the dollars, Bill. The people in the top 1 and 2% are paying, the 1% are paying 37% of all the income taxes. The inequity in our system is the fact that you've got this lower end of the income scale that's paying everything in payroll tax and almost nothing in income tax. And then at the upper end of the income scale, they're paying more income tax and not as much payroll tax. We need to fix the whole system.
But the payroll tax is the income tax.
Payroll tax, not income tax.
Oh, yeah. They take it out for your IRS. I'm afraid I know too much about that.
Well, but the payroll tax is supposed to be dedicated to Medicare and Social Security.
Well, some of it is,
Yeah.
and some of it goes into the Treasury. Do you think the Tea Party will finally go away and just meld into the greater Republican Party?
No, I think they're going to keep on, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see some more growing pains over the next couple of election cycles, and you might see people running, as libertarians and things like that. They won't win, okay, but there's a lot of unhappiness in the center right to right now. So it's hard to know what's going to happen.
The Democratic, some of the Democratic consultants call the Tea Party the low information group of voters. Do you agree with that?
I disagree with that. These are people that really study issues and understand what it is, and they're a little old-fashioned in their views, but it's the kind of old-fashioned that I like, meaning that we go back to not spending more than what we take in to try to at least get to that point. I love Tea Party people. I love traveling around the state and meeting with Tea Party people. When I spoke in front of one of the highest moments of my career was speaking on the Capitol steps in Washington, D.C. to hundreds of thousands of Tea Party people that came in. And do you know the Capitol Police said it was the first time they'd had that kind of size of group and no arrests. And when the people left, it was cleaner than when they came. So it was a great event.
Tell me, Matha, what you see for your future and what do you see for do you ever see a time that you may rethink your political stances and move to the Democratic Party instead of remaining in a party that looks like it is headed toward being a regional party? It's the party that Zell Miller thought he was talking about when he wrote the book, A National Party No More. He thought it was the Democrats. It looks like from the last couple of elections it may be the Republicans.
Well, look, I don't see, who knows about your points of view over time and how they're going to change or not change. I've been a conservative my whole life, even though I voted Democrat in the early part of my career, but in the early part of my life. But of course, everybody voted Democrat. I mean, it was kind of the same thing in Georgia that what we're having now. In the 1960s and 70s and before that, everybody voted Democrat. Now everybody's voting Republican in Georgia. Look, I'm going to go back into my media career and I'm going to try to have a voice there. I'm going to continue to develop that, and I've been so blessed to be able to speak to people and to have people like what I have to say and do that. So I'm going to continue that. I haven't ruled out running for office again. I may do that again. I really want to work on getting...
What office would you run for? A federal office?
A federal office. And let me tell you why. People always say, well, why did you start there? Why didn't you do the path? Well, the path, which is where you go to school board and then state and here and there, I just think that those offices are already balancing their budgets, and that my expertise is in federal issues and those kinds of things, and that's where I would be the most help. Also, I just think that we're in trouble as a nation, and I want to do everything I can to try to help that. So I don't know what that office is going to be, or if it'll be at all. But I'm gonna be available. I'm going to be committed to helping women and minorities in the Republican Party. I think that it's important because our values are congruent with what groups, church-going blacks and Hispanics and things like that believe in. When I would visit black churches on the campaign trail.
They don't vote for you.
Yeah, but when I visited those churches, because I was going to go to church every Sunday anyway, so I went, and these women would come up to me and they would ask me three things: how I felt about life, how I felt about marriage, and if I supported Israel. And that these are very conservative people that we are not speaking to, that we've got to acknowledge as a Republican Party that we're not speaking to these folks, and that we need to figure out how to do that, and I want to help the Republican Party do that. So I don't foresee me changing as far as parties are concerned. And I think that people have thought the Democratic Party was dead at certain times. People have thought the Republican Party was dead at certain times. But as you know, one thing I feel strongly about is the one thing that Democrats and Republicans agree on is they don't want another party. And they have made it difficult for parties to rise up the way they have organically in this country over the years.
Except the Tea Party is consuming the Republican Party.
It's not a party. It's an ideology. It's an ideology.
Some people say it's a bunch of extremists. You don't think so?
Some people say you're an extremist.
Oh, they're wrong. I think otherwise I'd do it.
Well, good. Well,
Yeah,
thank you
I
so
enjoyed
much.
it.
There'll be a lot more from me. We'll have to do another one of these in about 20 years.
I may not be around, but I'll look forward to viewing it
That's right.
with you.